Good evening and welcome to a regular meeting of the Oak Harbor City Council. It is the first Tuesday in the month of September, September 5th, 2023 at 6 p.m. And I'd like to call the meeting to order at this time. And tonight I'd like to invite you to stand to join in our invocation, which will be led by Reverend Greg Steible from the Whidbey Presbyterian Church, and immediately following the invocation, I will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Reverend.
Hi, everyone. Greetings from Whidbey Presbyterian Church. Please take a moment with me while I pray. Oh, Lord, I thank you for the beautiful day that we've had today, and I ask that you can help that beauty continue. As our students return to school this week, meeting their teachers, some for the first time, be with them. Give them open minds and willing spirits. Give the teachers and the staff and the administrators energy as they begin this school year. And Lord, I ask that you keep the beauty of this day going in this room as well. Bless the city employees and their reports. Bless our city council members and elected officials in their discernment and deliberation. Bless our citizens. May their voices be heard, and may you build bridges of relationship and hope between all people. I thank you for this island that we call home and for all the people here. And I ask that you continue to bless all of us with health, hope, optimism, and love. And I pray all this in your holy name. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend. Please join me in the pledge. So tonight's meeting is being streamed live on YouTube and Facebook and will be broadcast on cable channel 10, HD 1090 following the meeting. Attendees are participating in person and via teleconference. Guests that are included in staff presentations will be excused at the conclusion of the agenda item as appropriate. So it looks to me like we have a full council. So I'm not going to ask our clerk to call the roll. Just note that we have a full council. I would like to note that Councilmember Wiesner had hoped to join us at our August 15th meeting and then was unable to do so. So I'm requesting a motion to excuse Councilman Wiesner. Yes, Councilor Munns.
I'd like to excuse Councilor Wiesner for that meeting.
Okay. Motion second to excuse Councilor Wiesner, and that was the meeting of August 15th. Motion by Councilor Munns, a second by Mayor Pro Tem. All in favor signify by raising your right hand. Passes unanimously. Thank you. So are there any suggested changes to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move forward with the agenda as presented. And this evening, we do not have any proclamations, but I believe we do have an honor recognition. And at this time, I'd like to call our Oak Harbor Police Department Police Chief Dresker. Chief Dresker, welcome.
Well, good news and bad news. I do have a recommendation for a change in the thing today because my officer's not here. So all of our officers on duty, and two that were coming on duty, and detectives, and we were assisted by a few county officers or deputies. Had to respond to a reported firearms violation, which they're still on. Nobody's hurt, but we're looking for suspects on it. So I brought it just in case they show up, but they're not here right now. That's more, sorry, Council, that's more of a priority, as I know you would agree. So if they show up, I may ask to maybe interrupt if there's a convenient time to do that. If protocol says no, then we can certainly reschedule this, which we may have to anyways. And then Captain Sloak is with them also, so he's not going to be here right now. I anticipate he'll be here for our presentation. If he's not, then I'll carry on.
Later on in the meeting. Okay, thanks, Chief.
Yep.
We'll see what turns up here. We'll move on then to item number 3 on the agenda, citizen comment period. Citizens may comment on consent agenda items or subjects of interest not listed on the agenda at this time. Citizens will have the opportunity to comment on the remaining agenda items during the meeting as appropriate. Citizens can also visit our website prior to our meetings for methods to submit public comment or contact our city clerk, Julie Nestor, by phone or email when submitting comments. Please include your name and address. Public comments sent anonymously will be shared with the mayor and the council but will not be displayed. We have received 2 new public comments since our last regular meeting, one from Valerie Alanes, who lives north of the city limits, regarding council comments at the August 15th council meeting, and one from Joe Kunzler regarding OLF Coopville. The comments are now displayed here. Okay, we'll turn to citizen comment period for folks that are here. We have, I'll turn to our clerk.
Thank you, Mayor. First on our list is Carl Brewer.
Mr. Mayor, council members, I'm Carl the Carpenter, last name Brewer. I'm a Naval Air veteran and retired carpenter. After active duty, I drilled in the reserves at NAS Whidbey. We have family and friends on the island as well as in Anacortes. My wife and I would love to build our retirement home in the Oak Harbor area. Whether that happens depends on how you vote on an annexation decision on the property. So let me explain. We purchased the last undeveloped lot in an existing development in the county that borders the city limits. When I applied to the county for a permit, I was informed that the city has the right to annex our property, and until the city council votes on that, the county won't issue any permits. Obviously, the delay is frustrating, but not game-changing. The real dream killer is the fact that if you do annex our property, according to your planning department, we will not be allowed to build anything at all. I'm here to ask that you vote not to annex our dreams into thin air. Thank you for your consideration. I spoke to your planning department today and was told that you haven't seen the paperwork that they're generating at this point. So this is just my plea that you take my side.
Thank you, Mr. Brewer.
That's all.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Okay.
Mayor, next on our list is Laura Renninger.
Hi, good evening, Mayor Severns and council members. I'm Laura Renninger, and I live at 730 Southeast Mailer Street here in Oak Harbor. Tonight, I'm representing the Oak Harbor Gary Oaks Society. I'd like to bring to your attention 2 important items. First, our volunteer nonprofit group recently coordinated with the city to get the application for Smith Park submitted to the Washington Historic Register. The register is an official listing of historically significant sites and properties found throughout the state. The list is maintained by the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation that includes districts, sites, buildings, structures, and so on that have been identified and documented as being significant in local or state history, architecture, archaeology, engineering, or culture. Listing in the Washington Heritage Register is strictly an honorary designation and raises the public awareness about historic and cultural values. The Oak Harbor Gary Oak Society is very proud and happy to announce that our application has been officially accepted for Smith Park. Eventually, the city will receive a fancy letter and a certificate stating this information. In future, the Oak Harbor Gary Oak Society will coordinate with city parks regarding the display of a bronze plaque promoting Smith Park's acceptance into the state register program. The second thing I'd like to bring to your attention is Oak Harbor Gary Oak Society's recent publication of the Oak Harbor Giant Acorn Scavenger Hunt and Coloring brochure. Council should have received a copy of this during your August workshop. Our group did a soft launch of the brochure at our outreach and sales booth during Music Fest. Volunteers talked to many people, both locals and out-of-towners, who were excited about the brochure and about having a chance to better study the giant acorn and hear the story behind its creation. It is yet to be decided where this brochure will live digitally. Ideally, it could be featured on the city website, as well as the Oak Harbor Gary Oak Society website, with hard copies living at the Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for listening.
Mayor,
Congrat-
that concludes our list of those who had signed up.
Okay. Congratulations, Laura, and to your group. Make sure and tell them that we appreciate their constant hard work and all of yours. So I'll reach out to those here. If anyone else would like to comment, citizen comment period. Not seeing a rush to the microphone, we'll move on to item number 4 on our agenda, which is our consent agenda. Any changes or questions? Not seeing anybody looking for any changes there, so that will be approved as presented. So we'll move to mayor's comments. Obviously, it's back to school. It's that time of year. Please remember to slow down in school zones. Follow detour signs if and when you see some, and just appreciate. I know some of you were out welcoming our students to their first day. I heard some reports about that, and thank you to council for your willingness to do that. It's always a fun time seeing the excitement and even a few tears once in a while, rare, and they don't last very long, it seems like. The Oak Harbor Music Festival. Thank you to Chair Cynthia Mason and the entire team of board members and volunteers. My goodness, the amount of volunteers and community that get together to make that happen. It was a wonderful, magical weekend-long event. Thanks to our city police and fire departments, our city staff, who worked tirelessly to help set up and take it down. I had some family in town visiting. It not only was safe and seamless, but I took our little granddaughters down not that long after it was over, and they cleared that street so fast. It was really a successful festival, so thank you so much. And speaking of great events, we have 2 more that are coming this weekend. Hydros for Heroes, very exciting time, and the Whidbey Cruisers Car Show. So portions of Bayshore and Southeast Pioneer will be closed. Please come help support these events. Have fun. When I announced at the festival that we'd like you to come and enjoy these events and festivals and have the best time of your life when you come to these. Have fun, leave the negative, and come enjoy the positive with us. So thank you very much. I'll turn to council for council comments. Any council comments at this time? Yes, Councilor Munns.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank the school district for including us, who were available to be able to go greet the kids. It's just a big time, and they love to someone new they don't know to show off their new backpack or their tennis shoes that light up or something. And it just brings back, if you have children or nieces and nephews, but it was exciting to see the kids so eager. One thing was pointed out to me is not everyone is remembering it's the first week of school, and there is some speeding, and they were going, oh, if we could just get them, you know, at 8:15 at Crescent Harbor, they turn on the signal light, and they turn it off at 9. And it's unbelievable just standing there watching the buses come in, how many people, there are 50 on Crescent Harbor, it goes to 40, but they do not slow down to 20. So if the public in general will do that. And the Military Appreciation Picnic, it was started in 2003, and it is a way for us to express the city that it's not us against the base or the base against us. It's a partnership, it's volunteerism on both sides, and it's a free lunch. We're cooking 600 pounds of pork to be pulled and chopped with coleslaw and other sides. And so it'll be a great weekend. We have a band, and it's just a fun event for kids from 12 to 4 back in Windjammer Park. It started there, and it's nice to see that it's back there, and hope everybody will come. So thank you.
You bet. That kicks off at noon, did you say? Okay. Yes, sir. 16th, on the 16th. Great. Okay. Any other council comments? Yes, Councilor Wiesner.
Thank you, Mayor Severns. Also, this coming weekend is the base flight line open house. So, I mean, pretty busy weekend in Oak Harbor. Car show, hydro race, base open house, which is a big draw. And this year, Hydros is also partnered up with the base, where Friday night we're doing a special presentation out at the base with several vintage drivers. There'll be a unlimited vintage hydroplane coming up from the Hydro Race Museum, and just a way for the sailors to be able to get out Friday night at the Convergence Zone, 5 o'clock, and meet some history. Some of these guys that we're bringing up are guys who have been doing this for 40, 50 years and are really, you know, the history of the sport. So Hydro Race free, of course, downtown Oak Harbor Bay, and like you say, Whidbey Cruisers car show. That'll happen on Saturday. So Sunday, Pioneer Way will open back up, but expect to see a lot of cars out, and sounds like it's going to be a fun weekend following up after Music Fest. I mean, that's a pretty hard act to follow, Music Fest, but pretty exciting 2 events back to back here in our community.
Thank you, Councilor Wiesner. Anyone else? Yes, Councilor Hoffmeyer.
Anything I added would basically just be trumpeting what the 3 of you just said. You know, one of the pictures up there said, "This is community." You know, and I think we all agree Oak Harbor is community. And to all of the council members that make themselves part of all these events, music festival or back to school, you know, we have a very good council right now. So thank you for that, and can't wait for the next long weekend.
Okay, anyone else? Any other? Okay, I think this might be a time, Chief. That might be a good time if council's willing to go.
Excellent. We worked that just right. We planned that all out.
You
so,
did.
Yeah, good job. So I'm going to let Captain Slowick read the presentation. Officer Mel Lomaw's with us, a couple of officers from the department. You'll see they're all ready to go because they were out there doing their thing. So Officer Lomaw, I just want to say he's not a stranger to receiving recognition and accolades from us. He's consistently making top DUI arrests, some other things for us. So we're happy to present him with this. So I'll let Captain Slowick read the presentation, and then I'll just mention real quick about this letter I got.
Hello, Mayor, City Council. So, Mel? So this is the Oak Harbor Police Department Emergency Treatment Award. So on August 21st, 2023, patrol officers responded to a medical call for a 75-year-old male who had collapsed and was not breathing. Officer Lolema was the first responder on scene and found the patient in the garage and in cardiac arrest. Officer Lolema immediately began administering chest compressions to the patient, and as fire and EMS arrived on the scene, he provided the patient's status. Officer Lolema performed chest compressions for over 7 minutes, allowing fire and EMS to focus their efforts on airway management, intravenous medication, and cardiac rhythm interpretation. After numerous cycles of CPR, defibrillations, and medications, the team's efforts resulted in the patient being stabilized and airlifted to Everett's Providence Hospital, where he received further cardiac care, although the patient tragically did not survive the evening. Officer Lolema's training and experience led him to take quick actions in providing emergency treatment to the patient, and his actions are a credit to him and to the Oak Harbor Police Department. Officer Lolema is hereby awarded the Oak Harbor Police Department's Emergency Treatment Award.
So I just want to mention that one of the fire department captains wrote us a letter that generated some information on this. So, and it's my understanding that I think when Captain was reviewing some footage, body camera footage, I don't know if it was 7 minutes or something. It was a pretty sustained CPR that Officer Loma was doing. And then, of course, fire gets there and start doing their thing. The capability of our officers being able to perform those life-saving chest compressions while the fire department and aid and ambulance and stuff are setting up their thing to start taking that over is, I think, a big help to them. Certainly, we love to see them arrive at those things because all that help is certainly needed. And I think this gentleman who ended up passing later that night was conscious and alert for part of it, from my understanding. Even, I think, called up the fire department and thanked them for their efforts, but complications took hold, unfortunately. So I think those efforts were capable of providing some additional time for maybe the family. And I do appreciate the medics and the fire department personnel who were there to assist and then take over. And again, I think Mel, how many years now with us?
Knocking on the door of 25, sir.
25 years. So Mel certainly displays all of his experience as he does this stuff. I know he doesn't falter or hesitate when it comes to medical calls because he knows how important it is to get there and start evaluating the scene and providing care as soon as possible. And he's known for doing that, and I very much appreciate that. So Mel, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief.
So I'm going to call a 5-minute recess so council can shake Mel's hand and thank him personally. Okay, I'd like to reconvene this Oak Harbor City Council meeting, September 5th. We took a short break to shake the hand of one of our very deserving police officers, and we'll resume the meeting at item number 6 on our agenda, which is public hearings and meetings. Item number 6A is continuation of public hearing ordinance number 1979, franchise agreement with Comcast Cable Communications LLC. And it looks to me like we have our city administrator, Mr. Oborn, assisted as needed by Attorney Lisa Marshall. Mr.
All right.
Oborn?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Blaine Oborn, Oak Harbor City Administrator, and I'm just trying to buy some time here while they load the item here. So this is the third time we've done this, so hopefully the third time's the charm. We'll answer all your questions and we'll get this done. So some great things, great questions here. Just go to the background here a little bit for some people at home that may be not familiar with this. We've had a 2004 agreement that was lasted 10 years, expired in 2014. I came here in 2018, and we were still working on renewing that agreement. And so in my 5 years, we finally got to where we have it ready to approve the agreement. Council has some questions, and I think we address their concerns. We also have, like you mentioned, our backup city attorney that's very familiar with this, that can answer any additional questions you might have. And with that, the next item here is we need to go ahead and continue the public hearing and then close the public hearing. And then the recommendation is moved to adopt the ordinance 1971 approving the franchise agreement with Comcast Cable Communications LLC.
Thank you, Mr. Oborn. So I would like to open that public meeting then at this time. Call for any public comments. Confirm that there are none. If none, and it doesn't look like there are going to be. So we will close that public hearing, and we will turn to council. Questions, comments, or motions? How do you feel? Mayor Pro Tem? Oh. Councilor Hoffmeyer?
Yeah, I was just going to say, thank you to Hillary Evans and to Lisa Marshall for working with us on this. And if there was no other comment, I was going to make a motion. Did you? Okay. I move to adopt ordinance number 1979 approving the franchise agreement with Comcast Cable Communications LLC.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. That motion reads exactly like the recommended action. Motion made by Councilor Hoffmeyer, second by Mayor Pro Tem. So any other input or questions? Seeing, oh yes, Councilor Stuckey.
First off, I'd like to thank staff for looking into this. I know the requests we were making about asking Comcast to upgrade their equipment and whatnot might have been futile, but I appreciate you for looking into that. And for those that may have not caught from when we talked about this before, this is a non-exclusive agreement. I've got a couple calls from people saying, how can you guys, sign us up for only Comcast? And this is a non-exclusive agreement. So I just wanted to reiterate that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
there was a open house of another competitor that might go through Oak Harbor, and so competition is good.
Wonderful. Glad to hear it.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Stuckey. Anyone else? All in favor signify by raising your right hand. Any opposed? Looks like that passes unanimously. Okay, we will then move right on to item number 9A. 9A is Police Department opioid settlement allocation of funds. Looks like we have both our chief, Kevin Dresker, and our Captain Tony Slowick then tonight. Welcome again.
Yeah, mostly Captain Tony Slowick, but I'm going to start off just by saying, as we delivered at the last council meeting, Captain Slowick covered a structure. We're here today to talk about a request for some allocation, and I'm going to turn it over to Captain Slowick in a minute just to let you know. So this has been a time in coming, a lot of conversations throughout the city leadership piece, and as we focused in on what could be a good use and what makes sense for the city. You'll see that in Captain Slowick's proposal. And I think it was a month or so ago, sitting in here, and we had some conversation about staffing. Well, clearly we have some option today for you, in addition to some help with some of the problems that we currently deal with and see within our community. So I'm going to turn it over to Captain Slowick, so I don't keep rambling on. At the end, we'll be available for questions, and I may summarize with a couple comments. So, Captain.
All right, hello, Mayor and City Council. So today we're here to talk about the opioid allocation. So to give you a little background, our settlement agreement background is that in 2022, the Washington State Attorney General resolved a lawsuit with companies found to have played a key role in fueling the opioid epidemic. In April of 2022, the City Council authorized the signing of the One Washington MOU. In September of 2022, the City Council authorized signing the allocation agreement for opioid funds. And in January of 2023, the City Council signed the MOU forming the North Sound Region Opioid Abatement Council. And in August of 2023, the City Council was presented with a method to distribute funds. So this is from our previous informational slide, which is the settlement funds that we'll be receiving over the next 17 years, or from 2022 through 2038. It's a total of $955,055.46. This allocation, or this presentation, is broken into 3 strategies. So it's a 3-strategy approach: continuation and expansion of law enforcement services, support regional drug task force operations, allocate funding accounts for, and there's 3 accounts: administration of the opioid settlement fund, City of Oak Harbor administrative costs, and fund to support future actions as it relates to the opioid crisis. So strategy 1. So it's the continuation and expansion of law enforcement services. So situations that Oak Harbor Police Department is dedicated to the safety and service of our community. Due to increased calls for service and increased time spent on patrol response, there's less available time for patrol officers to support intervention and outreach programs. Over a 2-year period, there's been a significant increase in non-criminal calls dealing with mental health, substance abuse, and intervention services. More police officers are needed to expand support to the vulnerable and addicted population impacted by the opioid crisis. So the action that we're recommending for strategy 1 is to create a new commissioned police officer position, which is a 29th position. This is allocation of $70,000 annually for a 7-year period of 2024 to 2030, a total cost of $490,000. The police department will combine the allocated opioid settlement funds, which cover about 45% of the cost of the police officer, with funds already allocated to the department's budget, but unfilled in a police support officer position. The existing funds within the department budget will amount to about 55% of the cost for the officer. Combined, these 2 sources will provide funding to create a new, fully funded 29th police officer position. And over the 7-year period, the percentages will change, and we'll see that next on this chart. So to represent what we're doing is we're taking the unfilled police support officer position in blue, and we're adding that opioid funds of 45% roughly for that officer to create a new commissioned police officer position. So the new officer is it's going to be part of our special services division, and it's going to be called, the acronym we're going with is PEAT. It's Prevention, Education, Enforcement, Treatment, and Training. That's what the person's going to be dedicated to. About 45% of this person's position will be dedicated to the PEAT strategy, and that's tied to the funding for the opioid settlement funding that will be allocated for this person. So that prevention is community outreach, vulnerable prevention outreach, behavioral health referrals, connection to care. Education piece is education and safety initiatives in community, businesses and schools. Enforcement is to support pre-arrest and post-arrest diversion strategies and task force support. Treatment is liaison with co-responders, opioid outreach, the designated crisis responder, Recovery Navigator Program and referral services, and then training is annual first responder training for opioid strategies, safety, and trends. So the cost breakdown and allocation is initially out of the 2022-2023 bank would be initial allotment of $44,510.84 would be allocated, and then that would be broken down with the annual money that we get every year, as seen on this graph. In total, this shows that we are fully funded for the next 7 years for this position. There's another graph showing the representation of how much of the officer's position will be funded by opioid settlement over the next 7 years. As you can see, it's based off of cost of living adjustments. That money decreases the cost of the officer based off of those labor negotiations that we have with the labor union and cost of living. So the second strategy is Regional Drug Task Force strategy. So since 2014, the Eau Carver Police Department has not had a narcotics detective. A high number of counterfeit prescription pills are laced with fentanyl and distributed in Island, Skagit, Snohomish, and Whatcom counties. Frequently, officers and people in our community encounter opioid-laced pills, which can be deadly in a single dose to the user. Narcotics trafficking and distribution has no jurisdictional boundaries, and narcotics investigations require a specialized regional team, which is not supported by the department's current staffing. So the FDA, Border Patrol, Department of Justice identify improved enforcement and interdiction strategies as a method to counter the opioid crisis. So the action for this would be, it's recommended that we allocate funds to support the Skagit County Interlocal Drug Enforcement Unit. This is the task force in our area who supports interdiction investigations, and they have supported us for numerous years. And at this time, we don't have the staffing to put a dedicated officer on their task force. So the allocation of a one-time $21,000 allocation to Skidoo operations in the amount shall be broken over a 3-year period of $7,000 a year, and that would be from 2023 to 2025. The result that we'll get from that is support current and future law enforcement efforts to impact the opioid epidemic, prevent overdose deaths and other harms through interdiction strategies, and annual education to law enforcement and other first responders on current opioid trends and opioid impact to the community. Finally, it's to invest in collaborative efforts with the purpose of preventing overprescription, opioid misuse, and opioid overdoses. And the third strategy is the allocation of 3 separate funds, and this is the remainder of the money. So first is per our agreement with the OAC, or the Opioid Abatement Council, or the MOU for that, requires us to pull 10% of our annual allotment every year out and have that available for the Opioid Abatement Council for administrative costs. So the first fund would be doing that. So that's part of the MOU and us agreeing to that receiving that money. So that would be the first fund. The second thing that would do is the City of Eau Carver will incur administrative costs related to the distribution of these funds. We know this through the grant coordinator, through other administrative things, so we would set aside money for that piece. And then the last part would be recognizing the need for future support of opioid strategies impacting the community that we haven't identified currently, that the City Council can decide how to use those funds in the future. So the action would be annually allocate 10% of the settlement funds received each year for the administrative costs related to the Opioid Abatement Council. Money not used at the end of the calendar year shall be reallocated into the Future Opioid Strategies Fund. And that is what we're calling the last fund for future needs. The second part of this would be allocate a one-time $5,000 into a fund for the city's administrative costs related to the opioid settlement, and this is to distribute those funds over the next 17 years. And then the third fund would be establish a one-time allotment of $21,801.68 into a fund for the future opioid strategies related to the opioid crisis. Allocation of money from this fund shall be brought to the City Council for all funding decisions. And that last amount where that comes from is that's the remaining money left after this first year, or this first period. So the breakdown over the next 7 years is, or technically be 8 years, 2023 to 2030, would be as shown on this graph here. As you can see, there would be no money not allocated. And what we're making a recommendation here is a motion to approve the allocation of opioid settlement funds as recommended by the three-strategy approach presented, and will be available for any questioning.
Can you go back to that last slide? That one there. So the only money that's, it's represented here, but it's not, is that 10%. So I'm sure it would have come up on a question. If that 10% for OAC is not used by OAC, we retain it. So each year, if that OAC 10% is not used, that money could then go into the future opioid strategy allocation fund, or wherever council decides they'd want that money to go. We wouldn't find that out to the end of the year. So just to be clear, that per 10%, if it's not used, and likely it could not be used, but whatever portion of that would retain with us. So that would then be unallocated money, which we envision going to the strategies allocation fund for distribution, or council can choose something else as they desire.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Thank you, Captain. Before we ask council for input and questions, I'd like to verify with our city clerk that we've gotten no public comments about this
That's correct,
From
Mayor.
our-
No public comments were received.
from our public. Okay. So I'll turn to council then at this point for input or questions. Well, they're certainly welcome to come up if they'd like to. Anybody from the audience, and it doesn't look like it. Actually, I did look out there, and they didn't look like they were getting ready to run to the podium. Councilor Wiesner.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for that Captain Slowick and Chief Dresker. I'm really interested, and the Chief and I had talked about this a few days ago, in the prevention portion of the position of the new officer, right? I mean, prevention, let's face it, prevention could cut off a whole lot of things ahead of time. And I'm interested in the behavioral health referrals. What kind of system you guys have in place right now? I hear in our community it's hard to find a mental health provider, even with great insurance, right? What kind of facilities or what kind of tools do you guys have when you pick up somebody off the street that's in the middle of a mental breakdown and needs some help?
Yeah, certainly. So first, let me just say that referrals and requests for services all voluntary in Washington State. So someone has to want to receive the services before we can refer them to services, but they have to want to receive the services to go to the services, right? So currently we have ATUA, which is the mental health and drug facility in town. That's a voluntary facility. We also have a designated crisis responders, which is a state contracted mental health person who can evaluate and can send somebody into like a 72-hour hold and get them a bed at a facility. We have Island County has their human services, which has a bunch of opioid outreach and mental health people who can do evaluations and get people into services that are contracted by Island County. So currently we have a embedded social worker that works with us. That person has a lot of mental health certifications. They are a tool that is provided by Island County, and talking with them, that position is well funded. And there's no belief that that position is going away. And they have another counterpart that works with the Island County Sheriff's Department. But for us, a lot of times it's us contacting a person in the street, getting them to decide, do they want services? And a lot of times they don't, they're actually not asking for services, and that's us referring them to services so that there can be follow-up with another officer or a team of the embedded social worker and the officer to safely go out and contact that person. And it's I'll say it's like a sales call. You know, you got to get those 100 no's to get the one yes. And a lot of times it's that recontacting over years and building relationships before somebody is willing to get some help and treatment. So there are some beds available. There is a waiting list for beds in this state. This is a larger state problem, not a county or a city problem, but we feel the impact here. And I'll say we partner well with the county in working with their human services and the outreach that we do. So, Chief.
Councilmember, I would add to that just that I think the voluntary people who are seeking treatment, there are resources they can be connected with. Do we have less maybe here on the island than they might have, so to speak, on the mainland? Probably, because of jurisdictional size, right, with Mount Vernon in that area. But if somebody clearly wants treatment or assistance, there are avenues to connect them to that, without a doubt. Where we run into more of the problems are the people who do not want that assistance and that treatment. And while that's voluntary, we have non-voluntary methods to do that too, through an involuntary treatment that we can sign if somebody's not able to take care of themselves and they're a hazard to their own safety and health and that kind of stuff. But typically that is a very, very short-term thing that may or may not get treatment down the line or even further be seen. And then the third route that oftentimes we see is somebody from a criminal justice perspective who ends up getting arrested because of violations, who has mental health problems, and then it can be a judge who can say, look, you've got to go in and do this visit, and so that's also another piece there. So there are available options and available people. Could there be more? Yes. Some of that's based on a whole gamut of stuff on our location.
And thanks for that. And you get, I mean, I just want to make sure that we're not losing the focus on prevention, you know, because quite frankly, here in our community, you folks are the ones who've had to take the lead there. You know, I mean, we have County Human Services down in Coopville, right? But you know, when you think about it here in Oak Harbor, you, that embedded social worker, you know, you guys are the ones on the street, right? And we need to make sure that we are providing you the tools that you need for that prevention category. And I appreciate the comment, you know, that you can swing and miss, you know, 99 times, but, you know, that one's, you know, precious, right? That's somebody's son, somebody's daughter, somebody's mother, brother, sister, right? So continue keeping us posted on the prevention side. You know, again, that's got to continue to be a focus. I know that's not necessarily your forte or your job, but that is obviously the task, or one of the tasks you've taken on here in the city, and we need to make sure we keep getting you the tools for that. Thank you.
Councilor Munns, did you have?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. On strategy 2, and you've broken down the 21K in increments of 7 for over 3 years. Is that better to infuse that amount of money instead of spreading it over the full time and make it a lesser amount?
So yeah, but providing it over a 3-year period allows the task force to adjust their budget and known funds that are coming in versus a one-time allotment that might not carry over to the next year. So this is guaranteed that they'll have this money over a 3-year period.
Okay, what if you took the 21 and go over, how many years is it, 10, 12? 8 that it goes?
Yes.
Would that have been better to do smaller amounts so that they have that steady, or this fits them?
No,
better?
actually, the task force currently is in a funding challenge at this time.
Okay.
And so any funding that they can get is needed. If you spread this out over a longer period, I think it has less of an impact for our community and the resources and services that we'd be benefiting from. So.
Okay. The other thing is comment was made that we don't have enough officers to actually have one, I don't know if it's a part-time or dedicated to work on this task force.
Mm-hmm.
How many more officers do we have to have, or does it work okay for us to not have someone part of that team? We can just use the team or have them aid us.
So, So there's no magical number. What we have to do is we have to have a staffing that we feel is capable of sustaining the type of policing that we want here in Oak Harbor, so that when we have somebody going and working with the task force who may end up working over there some of the time, over here some of the time, we believe we're at that level where we can do that. But again, I think that's a conversation that we have after the first of the year and try to figure out where we go with the staffing. And I think there's visions for that. I just don't feel comfortable right now that we're at that level. I think we can get there, but I think that's a conversation after the beginning of the year. I do think that needs to be had, that conversation. We help them. We've actually had officers helping them here, and we've actually sent officers over to help with them and help train, do some training with them. So they still have that interaction, but I'm pretty comfortable where we're at right now. But if we can get we can have that conversation at the beginning of the year.
And if I'm not mistaken, we would, I guess, have officers that are already here, part of the department, put in if they would like to be this special officer, and the new hire would end up filling another space on duties.
Yeah, when we get to that level, and when we do look at adding, whether it's part-time or whatever it may be, you're right, it would not be a new officer who'd do that. It would be an experienced officer who's got the capability, the temperament, the investigative ability, and all that kind of stuff. A narcotics officer is a pretty specialized, for lack of a better word. I did it for a few years. So we'd be doing that. New officer would not go into that position.
And,
You're talking about are you talking about this position?
yeah,
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I was talking about the task force again. You got me totally off track. I'm going to let Captain Sloak respond to that.
all right, thank you.
And I'll echo what Chief said. Yes, it would be an experienced officer that has shown the temperament and the dedication and the desire to work with the vulnerable population in our community, and that has this drive for this. So I think it has to be somebody that wants to collaborate and wants to work with all our partners and our community to move this forward. So.
And last question, this 29th officer, are they in the pipeline possibly, or you will just see who might?
Yeah, so we're currently interviewing we've got somebody who is in our background investigation for our 28th position. So if this gets approved, then we would be interviewing for our 29th position. Once that person gets hired, if they're an entry level, they would have to go to the police academy, which we know is several months out to get that person in, and then it's a 5-month police academy. And then when we have the staffing, we would move an experienced officer into this Pete position.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yes, Councilor Hoffmeyer.
Hey, I think, for all of us up here and the staff, we're all aware of how much work you guys have put into this over the last couple of years. It's probably one of the number one things with regards to policing that we hear from the community with regards to the opiate addiction and, how we can handle it. So to, have a proactive, fairly progressive answer here, I love it. And, I really, I also enjoyed watching Chief sit behind you like a proud coach. So the work that you two have done together on this, it's very appreciated. And thank you.
Thank you.
It's a start.
Councilor Stuckey.
So I assume that this new officer will probably get to know some of our vulnerable population pretty well, because a lot of this, I'm not going to make a blanket statement saying it's the homeless population, but there is a lot of repeat offenders, shall we say, that you spend your time with. What is the advantage, besides the fact that you're getting an extra officer for other things? What is the advantage to having an officer with police powers as opposed to filling this with a support officer who may come off as a little less threatening, who could maybe interact a little bit better in some ways?
Yeah, so I would say that right now we do a lot of interaction with our vulnerable population, working with our embedded social worker as commissioned officers. So the one thing about a commissioned officer is they have the ability to involuntarily detain somebody and then send them in for treatment. So if that could be up to a 72-hour hold, but get them mental health evaluation. A limited or a non-commissioned officer doesn't have that ability. And a lot of times, there are other tools that go with the commissioned officer, arrest authority, detentions, and those type of things, which you would not get from a non-commissioned person. So I think finding the right person is key. We have somebody currently at our department that does a lot of our interaction with our embedded social worker, and that person has the right temperament. It relates well to our vulnerable population, builds rapport where they come in seeking him, and I think that this position can have that same type of person, having it be a commissioned officer, and I think that just provides our community with more resources as well. Lastly, this does not, by creating this 29th position, does not prevent or does not stop the rest of our officers from doing this type of work. It just, I would say it just magnifies the type of work that we'll be doing, the results that we'll be getting, and the benefit that we'll be providing to our community. So.
And just add to this, and I know that's not what you were kind of asking, but from my perspective, I kind of sit back there and go, "Oh, wait a second, we can be nice." And I would tell you that, and I think Captain Slowick summarized it pretty well. The right officer with the right training and the right know-how, with the connections within the law enforcement criminal justice system, which, by the way, is an all-encompassing field, social work, counseling, law enforcement, all that kind of stuff. And we already have one who's focusing on this a little bit. I think, from my perspective, people will be more receptive to talk to that person than they would potentially to a civilian going out and having a conversation. There's multiple reasons why. Some people just like talking to cops, believe it or not, but I think having that person and then what uniform we have them in or they go in will be something for us to determine. We have what we can call a soft uniform. You have something, neither one of us are wearing the tactical vest, but that's kind of a hard uniform, right? So there are a variety of things that person can do in conjunction with the civilian we already have, who is part of this outreach program, at least for mental health, and the two are often connected. So I think just because it's a law enforcement officer, especially nowadays, does not mean that they can't get that that bonding with people. And I know you didn't mean that, but just to reemphasize that. And then they have the capability, training, and authority to, if something flips on a dime, to be able to deal with that.
So you've envisioned this officer maybe having, for lack of a better term, a softer touch? Or are they going to rely on those arrest powers pretty quickly? What do you envision? I know it's kind of a vague question.
I think every situation is dictated by the interactions you have. I think that finding the right person is somebody who is, wants to do the reach out, wants to do the outreach and get the person into services and looks at the vulnerable person as a human being who, is somebody's brother and sister, father or mother, and can talk with the person at the level that they're at and get them the resources that they need. So I will add, really quick, Counselor, is that Island County has opioid outreach. Those are civilian, non-police related people that go out in the community, and they go in our community too. So there already is that. What we're seeing is we don't believe that that's the additional thing that's needed. We believe that it is a police officer or commissioned officer for this position. And
I imagine that this officer will receive some specialized training. Can you speak on what that looks like? Specialized training, that could mean a 2-hour online course. Do you have any idea? I don't know what's available to officers as far as specialized training. Can you speak to what kind of training this officer could expect?
Yeah, so all of our officers get crisis intervention training 2 hours every year. They get a minimum of 8 hours in their initial few years on. They get a bunch of de-escalation training, patrol tactics training, which is additional de-escalation training. But I think when you're talking about this person, they're going to be the one who's reaching out to these task force, reaching out to Border Patrol, finding what are the current drug trends right now, what are we seeing in our community, being able to be available for our business community, our Chamber of Commerce being able to provide education information and get that out. If the school district or our SRO want more information, this would be somebody who would be sort of our resident expert, is what we're envisioning. And this person will be providing our officers and first responders in our community annual, or at least first our officers' annual training on opioids, and available to our first responders. So.
And my final question, which may be a little difficult to answer, let's say we approve this. 3 years from now, what sort of metrics could you use to say that this was a good call to have someone in this position? I mean, obviously it's hard to put an exact number. It's a vague question, but is there any way that 3 years from now you could say, you know what, that was a good call to have someone dedicated to that?
So we're already tracking, or the last couple of years we've been tracking through our radio logs, through our proactive activity, the activities that we have or interactions we have in the community. So we have a process of reviewing and seeing, okay, what kind of contacts are we having? What value of contact? We will implement more of that and really define more of what we need to have a good understanding of the work that's being done. I think that looking at, those type of referrals that we're having with Island County Human Services, the interactions that we're getting on TUA and other referrals that we're making in the community, the referrals we're getting to the Drug Task Force, and the diversion that's getting done in courts, I think holistically that will tell us a good picture. But through, as discussed last month, annually we're going to have to come back to City Council and tell you what are we doing with the money and how is it being spent, and we'll provide you a picture annually of what that looks like. If after that first year you're wanting more, we'll be able to adjust that as we move forward. But we feel like we'll be able to put mechanisms in that we would understand how the money's being used, time spent and all that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Yes, Councilor Wittgenstein.
Thank you both for putting this together and taking the time to explain it to us individually as well. For those having spent a lot of years working with these populations, opioid users and whatnot, prevention is absolutely key. And my thought process, if you guys have been talking about this, I personally am all in favor for this. I think this is an excellent approach for our community. I envision us seeing this officer interacting in the public long before this situation comes up where they'll hopefully have to make a split decision. It's relationship and rapport that works in prevention. It's what works in education. That's how we tackle this opioid crisis and addiction crisis, as you would really call it, heading forward. So do we envision this officer working with the nonprofits in our community that are already working on prevention, such as Oak Harbor Youth Coalition? Though we kind of highlighted our most vulnerable population within our community, which is a lot of times the most visible, my concern is prevention works at this high as well, age-appropriate prevention all the way up. And I would like to, hopefully also builds that rapport with our police officers if we have a police officer involved in that process. So it would be, I know there's a spot on that coalition, having been a part of that for a lot of years, to have an officer on there, and I would love to see that this officer participate with that organization again as well, as an option. So.
Yeah, definitely. I think we envision that person participating as well. And I was an officer that participated on the Youth Coalition, and there's a huge impact that has in building those relationships. And we already see that with our school resource officer and the partnership we have with our school district and the benefits that plays. So we feel like this is another expansion of that.
And if I could just mention on that real quick. So, and it's other things like Recovery Navigator Program. So I currently try to attend their meetings. And while I have a lot of information on a lot of people, I don't have the level of knowledge that some of our officers do who are out handling the calls when the meeting occurs. We can make them available, but the advantage to this, and when you talk about metrics, we could give you artificial numbers. I hate metrics when artificial numbers are inserted. But what we will do is we will track the time spent on different things with this officer. The thing is, people will get to know this officer as that person, and hopefully that translates to the community as they're going out. None of us like to forcibly make anybody do anything out there, especially at a mental health or drug addiction type of a thing. Unfortunately, we have certain roles that sometimes we have to do that, and sometimes that's the only recourse. But when we reach out when we can, especially if we have somebody dedicated, if an officer encounters somebody and we got 2 or 3 on the street and they get this weapons call, and well, that's a bad example because I'm telling you this guy's going to respond to that weapons call too. But if it's something less significant, they can simply call up, hey, officer so-and-so, can you come down? I got this guy down here and I got to go run to another call, and that person can spend some more time with it. So I think the people at the at-risk community there or having it will probably know this person and get to know them, just like we did back when DARE was in place, like SROs are, and they can spend that more time and attend those meetings, and the level of appropriateness for those meetings. And I only say that because some organization may not want our officer on a board or something. I mean, I was asked to be on a board when I first started here, but it was a conflict. So there's different things. When it's appropriate and everybody's good with it, then I think those are perfect places for our officer to be receive additional training, to be more and aware. And so I think those are great things to be involved with.
Anyone else? So did I see, oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Wittgenstein.
I was going to make the motion if we're ready for that. Okay.
So did I see, I'm sorry, did I see that you're looking for 2 actions or just the one that's in our packet? Approval of the allocation of opioid? Maybe it is. Okay.
Basically say the same.
That works. Okay. Go ahead, Councilor Wittgenstein.
I move to approve the allocation of the opioid settlement funds as recommended by the 3-strategy approach presented.
Second.
Got a motion and 2 seconds. I'm going to take, I think the Hoffmeyer second was the quickest, and the motion was made by Councilor Wittgenstein. And having said that, does anybody else have any input or questions? Seeing none, signify by raising your right hand your approval, please. Looks like that passes unanimously. Way to go, Captain. Way to go, Chief.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much.
There's no questions because we're leaving. So.
Okay, so I think the last item on our agenda is item number 10A, multifamily tax exemption update. And hopefully tonight we have our Development Services Director, Mr. David Kuhl, to introduce the item, and he's got a couple of consultants with him, perhaps even including our city consultant, Dennis Lefebvre. So I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Kuhl.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. Tonight we have our consultant, Anthony Hempstead and Cheryl Schwab, here with us to give us more information on the multifamily tax exemption. They've done a lot of work since the last time you met, and they have some real interesting information regarding numbers that we didn't have last time. Also, at the end of this, towards the end of this meeting, we'll talk about the RTA, the residential target area. And Mr. Lefebvre and the other planners came up with a philosophical approach and some options for you to discuss regarding where the residential target area should be. So this should be a good presentation, and we did get some good feedback from the Planning Commission a week or 2 ago, so this is an advanced version. So thank you.
Thank you, David. Can you have the PowerPoints pulled up, please?
Stand by.
And while that's coming up, my name is Anthony Hempstead, and we have Cheryl Schwab here as well. We're from Hempstead Consulting, and we've been brought on board to help the city with the multifamily tax exemption program creation. We did talk with most of you here a couple of months ago, and after that, there were a variety of questions. So today, hopefully, we'll be answering those questions that came up, and then also seeing if you have additional questions as well. Can you move to the next slide, please? And we'll jump one more slide. Okay, quickly, what is a multifamily tax exemption? Just as a quick review, it's the most popular program in Washington State for getting private developers to build multifamily in urban areas, and it's been around for a long time, since 1995, although when it was first created, it was really focused on larger cities. Over time, it's been modified multiple times. Now cities as small as 5,000 can offer this, and so just in recent years, Oak Harbor, among other places, can actually offer this now. So many mid-sized cities are adopting programs to try to spur multifamily in their communities, just like the larger cities have done in past years. And again, this can be for new construction. It can also be for rehabilitating existing structures. And it is a tax waiver program on the value added of multifamily development. Next slide, please. And while that value added for multifamily development is exempted from taxes, from property taxes, the underlying value of the land that it's built on continues to be taxed, and any non-multifamily development, if it's a mixed-use facility, for instance, with offices or commercial, those offices and commercial are taxed at the usual rate. And these projects can only go within what the city has designated as a residential targeted area within the city. And while this is a tax exemption for property taxes, all other impact fees and other taxes that you would normally get are still collected from that project that's under MFTE. Next slide, please. There are three types of MFTE program right now that can be used. In the past, there are some other permutations, but we're now looking at three: the 8-year, the 12-year, and the 20-year program. At 8-year, the state doesn't require any provision of affordable housing, so it could be 100% market rate. At a local level, cities can require some affordable housing if they wish, but it was really designed to encourage market rate housing in areas that are not seeing adequate development. And certainly it can have a very positive impact on a local housing market by bringing in more supply of new construction. Next slide, please. On the 12-year, then there is a non-market rate requirement. The state requires at least 20% of those units to be set aside for low or moderate income households. And it also has density requirements that the 8-year program does not. And for a city the size of Oak Harbor, it would be relatively dense at 25 units per gross acre. And then let's go on to the 20-year. Cheryl, do you want to take the 20-year here?
Sure. So the 20-year is a somewhat different program. It really focuses on home ownership. It requires that we partner with some type of nonprofit housing developer, such as Habitat for Humanity. And it is for households at 80% of AMI or below. And it's kind of a complicated program, and it is very different than the others. The land requires a 99-year lease, so that these houses will the intention is they will always be affordable, even if they move from owner to owner. And it is new in 2021, and as the slide says, Seattle, Tacoma, and Spokane and Vancouver are the ones who've currently done the program, implemented the program, although others have passed legislation to allow themselves to do it. And the 25% of units is as a minimum. It could be additional. You could have a higher percentage of units that are at 80% AMI. It just depends kind of, if you will, on the deal. So if you say had a piece of donated land, you could potentially pencil out to have additional units at the 80% versus market rate. So it's a little bit, we don't necessarily want to limit you to saying they have to be 75% for households of 80%, just because you just don't know the details of the, kind of the land acquisition and some of the other factors. And that will allow, Habitat or someone else to come in and have a better chance of doing it if it's the option of 25% or higher, depending on the deal.
Okay, MFTE, it can have some revenue implications, but what is very important is that the Island County assessor, we have had discussions with them, and they have said that they're going to follow what other assessors in the region are doing. And that is to follow the tax shift model that almost every other county in the state is doing. And under that, the taxes that would have been paid by that property that is receiving the tax exemption, they are shifted on a prorated basis to other properties around the city. And so if for a very high value property, they would get more of that shift. For a very low value property, obviously it would get less. But that is important also for other taxing jurisdictions, because while the city of Oak Harbor will continue to get other taxes such as property tax and utility taxes and the like, most of your sister jurisdictions, such as the school districts and the port district, they rely solely on property taxes, and so that tax shift is much more beneficial to them than just the city as well. Okay.
And I'm just going to jump in with a note about the 20-year program. So the owner, with all the programs, it's the owner who receives the tax exemption. So because the 20-year home ownership program, the low-income home owner is the person who owns the property, they actually, in that case, receive the tax exemption. So it's 20 years, and let's say someone buys one of these homes, they own it for 15 years, and then they sell it, and a new low-income owner comes in, they'll only have the tax exemption for 5 years. That's just the way the program's designed right now, but it is a little bit different than, say, the owner of a multifamily building that is renting out units. So just wanted to add that in as additional information.
Good point there, Cheryl. Tax shift can be hard to understand, and so we have an example here of hypothetically what could happen. So if we take let's say a new 100-unit apartment complex comes into Oak Harbor. That'd be fairly large by Oak Harbor standards, but for calculating and showing what the impact is, we picked this round number. A reasonable number right now for what the value of each apartment could be in other Puget Sound communities is about 175,000 per apartment. And again, this doesn't include the underlying land. It is only the improved value of that individual apartment. And then we can calculate what that apartment would be paying. A fully loaded property tax for a property taxpayer in Oak Harbor right now is $895. There's a bunch of other numbers after the 95, but we're rounding to 895. But on a per millage basis, so at 175, that would come out to $1,567 a year in taxes. 100 units, almost $157,000 in taxes that would normally be paid by that development if it didn't have the tax exemption. Now let's move to the next slide, please. So what happens with MFTE? First, we have to look at what's the total of assessed value in Oak Harbor, and a bit over $3 billion. There are just under 7,000 different parcels, taxable parcels within the city. Again, just to get a number to kind of wrap our heads around on what the size of this is, an average, and of course these numbers can be very, very different on an individual basis, but the average parcel is about 450,000. It would normally be paying at Oak Harbor's millage $4,020 per year in property taxes. With the tax shift from those 100 units, that would add another $23 to the average parcel. Of course, most of us don't live in averages. There are very likely that large commercial structures will be valued much higher, and so they will be paying more of the tax. According to the U.S. Census, these numbers are a year old, so these things go out of date very quickly. But the U.S. Census says that the median home price in Oak Harbor was almost $330,000. So for that median priced home, the tax shift would be just under $20 for that 100 units, hypothetically. So that gives you an idea. From what we've heard from Department of Commerce, that impact at $20 for a median home, that would be on the relatively high side compared to what other communities. Cheryl, I believe in your discussions, the Commerce was saying Seattle, which has like half of these, the impact was like $5 per.
That's correct. And Seattle has half of all the MFTE units in the state, but it also has a very large property tax base. But yes, it's currently $5 impact for the average home. Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So that's the tax shift. But then moving on to the bigger picture, also, there are so many economic benefits for the local community of creating more housing. And the Lieutenant Governor has been out on a speaking tour for the last year because he heads up a JLARC task force on competitiveness. JLARC is a joint legislative committee and JLARC sets up different things for to be looked at by these task forces. But they did a Washington State competitiveness report, and the lack of housing is seen as the #1 threat to Washington State's economy. So not having enough housing is lowering our growth rate already and making it much harder to grow in the future. And communities large and small across the state, more and more people are saying that they are price burdened with the existing housing market, and we need more supply in order to help bring those burdens down. We are 49th out of 50 states in the country with having the lowest number of housing units per capita. So more housing is inherently a good thing in Washington State right now. But so if apartments are constructed in Oak Harbor, of course, it adds housing choice, and supply and demand usually does work, and it should help to tamp down other rent increases. And sales taxes and development fees can be very, very considerable for new projects. Of course, cities charge development fees to cover their cost for overseeing those developments. Although I've heard from some cities, not Oak Harbor, but that those fees can be very helpful in keeping overall planning and public works departments going. But the upfront cost of construction is very considerable, and it can add it spins off a lot of sales taxes initially. And even more importantly, that construction is usually done by local contractors and building professionals. It's not something that can be easily sent to other states or countries. Those jobs really tend to be local. So construction tends to really help the local economy. Once that construction is done, you have new residents that are shopping in Oak Harbor, and of course then they're paying all the usual taxes, sales tax, utility taxes, gambling taxes, other areas as well. Helps local businesses by bringing in more customers and economic vitality, and then many state and some federal payments are done on a per capita basis, and this new population will up the per capita numbers that are calculated for Oak Harbor receiving payments. And of course, once these things are built, projects tend to change hands every few years, and with REIT, there's the 0.25% plus the additional 0.25%. So there's 0.5% on what can be quite large transactions when a multifamily project does sell, and that goes right to your capital budget needs. So. Okay, next slide, please. Again, staying with our hypothetical 100 units that are developed under MFTE with the same values. Some ballpark numbers on what the economic impact of that is. The per capita payments and we're the per capita households in Northwest Washington are 2.5 people per household. They don't have a breakdown on apartments, but we're lowering that to 2.1, which has been used in other communities, and so that we're saying about 8,000 in annual per capita payments, utility taxes on a wide swath of different utilities. I figured at the Oak Harbor rate of 6.5%, would be about $22,500 a year. Sales tax, the Oak Harbor's percentage of that for these 201 people would be about $55,000 a year. So recurring funds about $85,000, but again, that doesn't include cannabis revenue, and that can be quite considerable for cities, or B&O gambling taxes, hotel taxes as well. All of those would increase, but we haven't put a number in there. In addition, initially constructed to build those 100 apartments, the Oak Harbor portion of sales tax would be about $330,000. And again, sales tax so goes to the general fund, very flexible dollars. Permit fees can be very substantial, but again, since those supposedly just cover expenses, we're not putting those in, but we could crunch those as well, and it becomes a fairly large number from permit fees as well. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, now we're on to RTAs, and we'll turn this over to David. But again, under the MFTE statute, cities can designate one or multiple residential target areas where they would like to focus multifamily development in the future. So with that, David and Dennis, it's toss it to you.
Actually, I'll pick up this piece. Good evening, Council, Mr. Mayor. Just as a reminder, the multifamily tax exemption emanated from a recommendation from both the Island County Affordable Housing Task Force and the Housing Action Plan, which the city adopted a few years ago at this point. So we're moving forward with a recommendation out of those two groups. What we have is residential targeted areas, and I'd like to give you a brief overview as to how we got to the versions that you have in your packet. We've had several meetings with the planning staff at Development Services through the last 6 weeks or so. And also, we coordinated through the unified meeting format, which is held every Tuesday morning, which coordinates projects with engineering staff and public works. So that was a benefit to have them get on board with some of the areas here as well. The next slide, I think, shows the first version that we looked at. One more, please. The first or point of departure basically was focused on the area that Steve Schuler out of Public Works is looking at, promoting some infrastructure improvements, doing some redevelopment opportunities, improving some water and sewer lines in this area. So we thought this might be a good start to at least create one residential targeted areas. There's a lot of redevelopment opportunities in this area. Some areas are getting pretty warm through the ages. The only major difference, I'll say, or not even major, but one of the differences between the triangle that Mr. Schuler has identified is we included kind of a strip of parcels on the east of Midway. That's a little variation from the triangle Steve is proposing. But we didn't stop there. The next map, I think, shows another option that we came up with as planning staff. Again, the light purple reflects the triangle area that we were talking about with Public Works. Then the dark purple is another area that we thought certainly could have potential to include RTA. Reason being, there's transit that runs through there. There's schools that provide population focus. There's an opportunity for redevelopment and as well as some vacant lands. So that's basically the second option that we came up with. Then we really kind of started thinking out of the box, or basically out of the city, if you will, to the gold areas, and really doing some long-term thinking about where some potential new RTAs could be developed. Obviously, at this point in time, we couldn't establish those since we have to stay within our city jurisdiction. But those are some of the areas that we thought could be future RTA expansion areas. One note, obviously these are very, very much in draft form. So it is up to the council to give us some direction on what your thoughts might be on where an RTA could be established within the city. So with that, we'll move forward. I don't know if Anthony, you're going to continue?
So could I ask you to pause for just a moment, guys? Mr. Hoffmeyer, did you have a question?
Dennis, hey, I have one quick question. On the proposed RTA map number 2, top of the triangle that we always talk about, the dark purple, is that dark purple there, is that going up as far as Northeast 16th?
I believe it does, yes.
Okay, it was the dark purple on the right there and the left was a little offset, so I was trying to figure out if that's where 16th was or what was happening. It's hard to see the roads on the map.
Yeah, we were cognizant of the fact that residential would not be allowed north of 16th Avenue.
Okay, the only reason I ask, I know there is 2 to 3 lots there that have long been targeted for several hundred apartments that would fit into here, and just wanted to make sure we weren't cutting that off one lot short or something. Thank you.
Okay, guys, back to you.
Yeah, on the RTA, I should note that that the triangle piece would also include most of the opportunity zone that Oak Harbor currently has. And while the investors have not used the opportunity zone yet, we think an MFTE overlaying an opportunity zone will get people to look very hard at that area again, and nice to be able to use a federal program, which doesn't cost the city of Oak Harbor anything, along with MFTE, and hopefully that can be a good spur to actually use this program. Okay, moving forward. Our overall recommendation is, again, we don't want to create a program just to create a program. We want the program to be used. And certainly some cities have created these programs and they have not been used. With the relatively challenging macro situation for housing developers right now, and we know that Oak Harbor does have some good development in the pipeline, but we want to keep that pipeline moving forward too, because new developments looking today are having a hard time getting financing. So we think MFT is a good idea. We wouldn't recommend putting additional requirements above and beyond what the state is asking for right now, because it just creates a larger hurdle. But we do think, as council suggested at our last meeting, that there was strong interest in all 3 of the programs, 8, 12, and 20. And we have reached out to some nonprofits about the 20-year program. Island County Habitat for Humanity and the Opportunity Council, and they were both intrigued by that. And so, again, no guarantee that it would be used, but they would like that in the toolkit as a potential thing that could be used in the future. So we recommend all 3 of those programs be adopted, and also. Things change, and policy should be living. And I would highly recommend that this this program be revisited within a couple of years after it is adopted to make sure that that it is having the desired impacts. Maybe the RTAs would need to be changed. It wouldn't be able to be loosened at that point, but it could be tightened more, or there could be other requirements that that the council would like to put on in the future. So with that, I think we're at the end of the presentation. So happy to take any additional questions that might have come up during today's presentation.
Okay, but let's deal with council first. Councilor Wiesner?
Thank you, Mayor. I've got a couple of questions. First off, for Mr. Fever, is there a reason why we didn't include in the dark purple that area on the west side of Oak Harbor Road by Northeast 7th? I mean, that's an area that we have quite a few older apartments in, and it would seem like the incentive to upgrade those would be beneficial. But we don't have that area included, doesn't look like.
No, Councilor, there is no specific reason why we didn't have that in, but that's a good recommendation to include in the map.
Yeah, if you take a look at that. And then I guess this would be another question for you in commenting on the 12-year and 20-year programs. Isn't our current density in an R4 zone maxed out at 22 per acre because of our height limitations?
That's the case, yes.
So the current 12-year plan and 20-year plan as outlined by the state would not even be able to be used in our community because there's a minimum of 25 per acre unless we looked at changing our height limitations or zoning maximums.
That's correct.
So, yeah, I mean, there's the rub, right? That's what we have to talk about, I think, before we talk about this anymore, right? I mean, you know, part of the reasoning behind the Affordable Housing Task Force recommendation to get behind multi-family tax exemptions was to create some of that below market housing availability, right? That incentive for that 12-year and 20-year tax exemption, as you had illustrated, right? It's a pretty sizable number, you know, for a developer to come in, and that does give them incentive to create that 20 and 25% of the units to be sold below market value, and thus creating more affordable housing. Now, I realize, of course, if we have a flood of units being built, you know, that supply demand, that would have some trickle down and some effect upon housing affordability. If we've got more housing and the same amount of people looking for it, it's going to have a trickle down effect, but it's not going to have a direct impact upon those people at, you know, 80% AMI. Not unless we get into those 12-year and 20-year programs, but with the 25 unit minimum requirement, nobody could possibly build one of those in our community with our current code. So I think before we continue any more discussion on this, we have to either grasp one of two things. Either one, we're putting in an 8-year tax exemption for private developers just to come build more stuff in our community, but we're going to be doing that on the back of other ratepayers, right? I mean, it's going to be shared by existing property owners. And we're not creating that affordable housing, which in my mind was the intent behind the regulation, right? That those people who could afford to pay a little more on their taxes do so, and that helps subsidize this, you know, below market rate housing. So either A, we're going to accept the fact that we're going to just put in a multifamily tax exemption for 8 years to benefit or to intrigue private developers to come here to build more housing, and that eventually will have enough housing built that would have an impact upon the final price, either for a renter or a purchaser. Or we need to sit down and relook at our existing density code. We need to have a long talk with our fire chief right? Because I think in order to get the kind of density we're talking here, there's really only one way to go up, in order to get parking, for 22 units on an acre of property, right? And create the footprint and do so in a 35-foot height. I think we're going to find a tough time of creating 25 or 26 or 27 units in that same acre along with the parking unless we go vertical. So I think that's got to be the next point of discussion before we consider what we're going to do with this. Thank you.
So any comment from staff on that, or we've got another question here? So Dennis,
I would observe on if council decides not to go forward on the 12 and 20 at this point because of that 22 unit limitation, you could still do the 8-year and then and actually add an affordability component to the 8-year because you can go above and beyond what the state requires. And if there wasn't a 12-year option, developers may consider an 8-year with, say, 20% at 80% AMI or the like. So that would be a way to start the program. Perhaps make additional zoning changes or land use changes if the city would choose to do so, and then introduce the 12 and 20. But you'll have that drafted and ready to go if and when you would want to do that.
Sure.
Just a quick follow-up to that comment. I appreciate you pointing that out, but the reality is, from the developer standpoint, I don't know if that's going to pencil, right? 8 years of tax incentive in turn for selling 20% of the development, 1/5 of the development at below market rate, right? Or renting at below market rate. So wouldn't we be creating a program that doesn't pencil out for a developer, right? Wouldn't we be one of those cities that would then have a program on the books that nobody's going to use? So I think before we looked at that, I really think we need to look at whether or not we can take advantage of this entire program the way it's currently written, because quite frankly, I think you need those tax incentives for that 12 or that 20-year period for it to pencil out as being a positive return for any developer. That's just my thought on that. Thanks.
Councilor Hoffmeyer?
Yeah, the multifamily tax exemption, with, as a council and a staff, we've been pretty fervent in our efforts to modernize our development code. The affordability of housing is one of the bigger issues we face. If you look at the Affordable Housing Task Force recommendations or our efforts to modernize the development code, the multifamily tax exemption is one of the gold standards. That said, I don't know if there was a poor internet connection possibly, or if I'm partially deaf from the music festival. Tonight's presentation did not assure me as much as I was already sure on this. So I would just say, I think before we move ahead, we should probably have an in-person presentation as we fine-tune some of these tweaks that we would like to see. So there's that. I guess not every night's a home run, and that's fine. At the top of the triangle there in the proposed RTA map 2, again, the roads are hard to see, but it looks like on the right side of Goldie, we're probably coming across Northeast 16th there. And then for whatever reason, we're most likely dropping down to Easy Street. I certainly would like to see that Northeast 16th line continue on both sides of Goldie. And other than that, personally, I think the proposed RTA map 2 is probably a good place to start. And then finally, the goal of this is, the affordability of housing. And as you add enough units to your housing supply, in theory, the price of housing altogether should come down a little when you're talking rental and whatnot. So the $2 a month tax shift is a tax shift, but in theory, you should be bringing down your rental prices more than that. So I guess, my question would be, can we, when we have an additional presentation, can we see some of the data from, cities like Des Moines or SeaTac or whoever that have implemented this? And, has it had the effect of making housing more affordable for anywhere other than said development? Thank you.
Anyone else? Councilor Munz? Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. So 16th Avenue, with the noise constraint, then anyone building on just this side of 16th is going to have to add extra insulation, different windows and stuff. And so that also drives up the prices of stuff because you're closer. And as they take down more of the trees in that area, then that's going to not have that buffer that we've had. Before it used to be really dense, and when they first took it down, people were complaining about, wait a minute, how come I have more noise on where I am? So there are some other things, but I agree, if we can't offer the whole package, then it isn't going to pencil out. I mean, we need to look at some other little pieces. I don't know what the rush is other than trying to have housing, but if we have a policy that no one's going to want to take advantage of, like so far we did the opportunity zone, and no one's taken advantage of it yet. And I would like to hear what the Planning Commission, what some of their questions were. This is just ours, but I don't see anything of what their questions and concerns were on that. We're supposed to be working together, and we count on them to help us out by giving us some ideas that maybe we're not thinking of. I mean, that's how it's supposed to work. They're appointed there, we're asking them to look into it and then to pass it on, and not just to rubber stamp whatever the staff has. Not that the staff isn't working. I mean, they are working their tails off, but yeah, there's just some other things. I mean, the crash zone, the noise zone, all of this also has other implications. And just making a line with 16th Street isn't going to do it. And I'm not sure where all the trees are in there because it doesn't show it, but that's going to make a difference too. And how much does it add more to the building by having to have the insulation, the 3-pane windows, whatever it is? So that's just some of my questions. Thank you.
Councilor Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Wiesner perfectly articulated what my concerns are. I kind of feel like we're putting the cart ahead of the horse. If we can't meet the development requirements of the 12 and 20-year programs, those are the things that we need to discuss before we implement something like this. Because I too have a hard time incentivizing or providing tax break to development for market rate housing. The whole idea behind this is that we're creating affordable housing. This is what we've talked about. And if we can't do that, we're just putting an additional tax burden on our current residents. And so I too would like to take a kind of a step back and identify, can we meet these requirements? What implications does it have to our police and to our fire and to our other departments before we provide an additional burden or tax break for development? So I appreciate your comments, Councilmember Wiesner, and I think you hit it right on the head. So thank you.
So a couple things. We've talked about this tax shift, and I think we've maybe overly complicated it. So just a simple yes, no, even though I think I already know the answer. These folks gain this exemption. The rest of us not getting the exemption, our property taxes go up. Is that correct? I'm looking for...
I'll answer yes.
Yes.
It's a shift.
Thank you. That's what I'm looking for an answer. I appreciate that. Keeping in mind with the 8-year, just trying to encourage development, if I'm looking at our last workshop where it has a breakdown of all the housing units, we already have 500 plus housing units in the pipeline. That may not all come to fruition, but the housing is coming. If I'm looking at those, am I correct?
Some of the total units have been on the board for 5 years. So
Okay.
that's the problem we have. We have a 180 unit and an under 130 that have been here pretty much the whole time I've been here. But we do have other units. We just did 2 hearing examiners on a 28 unit and a 29 unit. So we have a lot of small multifamily going in and taking advantage of the market. So we already have. So that's where my suggestion is especially if we went with the 8-year program, we targeted on the area where we're not seeing development, and that's that redevelopment area that we talked about. We can expand it if you want, but I still really like the light purple that was shown as an area we can really focus on and drive that in there. We could drive that in there with the 8-year program because it talked about the residential target area and just looking at areas where the market's not redeveloping itself, and that triangle we're talking about is not redeveloping by itself.
And I do like if we do this having an affordability component like the 12 or the 20 years. My last question is David Cool still on the line here?
Yes, he is.
You know, you mentioned and you glossed over it that the Planning Commission had some good feedback. It would be really helpful to us, and I think the Planning Commission may feel like their actions were a little more tangible if we got some sort of a recap in that with packets. I'm not saying every question, every thought, every idea, but just saying there was some good feedback. If it doesn't get to us, I feel like that's doing a disservice to everybody. I mean, is there any feedback? I mean, I would love to have recaps in the future for items that the Planning Commission goes over, but is there any feedback you can share with me? And I do acknowledge we have someone on our Planning Commission in the audience as well. But is there any feedback that you can share with me that maybe we haven't talked about or covered?
Yes, Councilman Stuckey. I think one of the big concerns I heard from the Planning Commission was from a business owner who is concerned about the tax shift going to his business. And so what Anthony and Cheryl have done is they've outlined the actual numbers for us that we didn't have before. And so the $20 is based on the median price of a home, as you saw tonight. And from there, I guess we'll probably have to go forward and find maybe what the cost shift would be for a business, but it's based on the value of a building, essentially. And so the shift would be a little more for a business, and that was the big concern that one of the planning commissioners had. So yes, we could certainly provide like a highlighted portion in a staff report that would show planning commission concerns and how we hope to address those in the future.
Thank you. Would it, as long as we're all okay with it, would it be inappropriate, as one of our planning commissioners is here, does he have any comment or anything to add? Well, it's optional, as long as there's no objection. Do you have an objection?
I don't have an objection to it at all. I think it's a great idea. I also think we should give the other three in the audience a chance if they would like.
Anyone who would like to speak, please.
John Chazar, Oak Harbor resident, 2700 Southwest Scenic Heights. If I could beg the council, can I speak as a resident first? I think this first one's going to come as a shock to you. Not a single person I've run into wants this tax increase, okay? I'm sure you just all fell out of your chairs. The question I struggle with as a resident, and I'll go to the Planning Commission in just a second, is how come we're in like what I'm going to call a rental death spiral? We have, by some guesstimates, over 1,000 people that work at the base, civilian and enlisted, that aren't living on the island because they can't find affordable housing. Okay, so that means rental, you can dictate whatever price you want for rental. And what happens there is, as the rents go up, the Navy keeps increasing the allocation, the yearly allocation that people can spend on rent. And you get three folks in the Navy get together and they pool their money, and that keeps driving the rentals up. I agree with Councilman Wiesner. Eventually, increased supply, okay, if supply exceeds demand, we will see prices come down. So now you're asking taxpayers to pay extra money to decrease the property value that they have, because as supply increases and demand remains the same or decreases, their property value goes down. So now, as a commissioner, So, yes, I can tell you at least 3 people on the commission, including myself, were opposed to the tax shift. And logic tells me is that we have a piece of property, and let's just use the 100-unit complex. Okay, it's 156,000. Are there any developers out there just waiting for you to pass this 8-year exemption to build just to save $156,000 a year, okay, on this, when they could dictate almost any price they want for their units? They don't want the affordable housing units because it decreases the return on investment and doesn't make sense because that exemption goes away in 8 years. So is anybody kicking down the doors trying to build these units here in the city? And so have we talked to developers, and will this be the one that puts them over the hurdle to actually start building here in the city? The other thing is, okay, let's just use this 100-unit facility. They're going to build it on a $500,000 piece of land. Okay, the county right now in the city is getting roughly, I'm going to just use round numbers, $5,000 a year in taxes off of it. Okay, it's sitting there. Without this incentive program, it's going to sit there probably for a long time because we have a lot of land in this town, not a lot developable right now, but that people aren't developing on, and the county's going to continue. And if this program doesn't go through, it's going to sit there, and the county's going to only get $5,000. So now we pass this program, and we give an incentive to a developer to come into this town and build, in this case, an $11 million apartment complex. Well, without that incentive program, that developer probably wouldn't have been here. Okay. But now the county wants to take that money, that's new money, it's found money. They weren't going to have it if you didn't pass this incentive program, okay? And they want that, but they also want the 100 residents to start spending money in restaurants. They want people spending, and you saw it's going to generate, by their estimates, a minimum of $88,000 a year in additional tax revenues. And so I'm a big believer in, okay, we need to have some risk and skin in this game also, and I granted, you have no control over what the county does to a certain extent. And I wish there was like a medium ground in between 100% of the tax liability or like 60% of the tax liability. Because I recognize that 100 new units, okay, will add a burden onto the school district if there's children involved. And that money comes from property taxes. I understand that. But we need to have some skin in the game and have some risk in this also if we're going to provide incentives. Because right now we just want to defer that to the taxpayers. And I can tell you a lot of people don't like the taxes going up, especially from my work on the school bond. So, but that was the biggest concern from the Planning Commission was this tax shift. There was other comments about affordable housing. The more burden we put on a developer for affordable housing, decreases the return on investment and decreases the likelihood of someone building. And there were some concerns about single-family homes, and I believe that's all addressed in the presentation. But our biggest concern was the tax shift. And one of the commissioners who owns a business, I didn't know this, but businesses pay a higher proportion of business property taxes than residents. So, and he was worried about that tax burden on, to quote him, already struggling businesses. So, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone else in the audience care to speak? No. Had their chance anyway, right? Oh, I'm sorry. It's up to council. Yes.
Thank you, Sandy Peterson, Oak Harbor. What I didn't understand in listening to that presentation, and I think we all know, if you look at your property tax, there's an undeveloped part of your tax and a developed part, and they as you develop your land, it costs you more to have a building on your land. And what I couldn't tell from the presentation is this tax shift going to be on the undeveloped portion or the bare land, or is it going to be on the developed portion, which is significantly more? And I also think that's something that we should think about in terms of tax shift. You're already getting money from a landowner at the undeveloped rate. So if you're shifting, in my mind, if you shift a developed portion, that's not fair to those of us who are already paying taxes on developed land. So it's just a question that was in my mind. And just from a real estate point of view, and from having managed multifamily properties most of my life, they're a for-profit endeavor. And people are not looking to, as lovely a place as we are to live, it's a green game. It's a what's in my wallet game, and I think this might be a losing proposition. I don't think you're going to see the influx of good builders come that you think you might. Thank you.
Councilor Munns.
Thank you. Today at Navy League, the skipper of VAQ 129, which is the Nugget, the new people coming in, guys and gals, and he said some of his people are forced to live in Everett to find affordable housing because there is nothing here. They go to Cedar Woolley and Passon. I mean, it's just wherever they can find someplace, they think, and a lot of times it's getting 2 or 3 bachelors together to split the costs. It's just really hard for anyone. And then on the builders, during COVID, and I think even now, you order so many trusses, and you find out that it's gone up $2,000 a truss. Oh, well, I'm not going to accept that. And then you have to wait until they come down enough in price, but not where they originally were when you ordered them. And so it's a very volatile market to even just have major improvement done on a house or something, because you never know. You order something, and then when it goes to be shipped, it's not the same cost. It's gone up high beyond what you think you can afford to pay. So, but I can get you statistics on where Navy families are living because they can't find something affordable. And yet the Navy wants readiness, and they want them to be able to be out the base within like 30 minutes. And coming from Everett is not going to work. And so some of them, if it's the duty, then they couch surf somewhere in order to be able to make their duty. So it's more complicated, and I think we need more answers and look at some of our codes that would make a difference. But we can't dictate what they're going to charge for rent. You may think of something and they're getting advantage, but it's still supply and demand, and she's right. Green speaks. What can I put in my pocket? So anyway, thank you.
Councilor Wiesner.
Thank you, Mayor. First off, to Mr. Oborn's comment involving the light purple versus the dark purple. Certainly there's something to be said if we have an area of town that we're looking for redevelopment in. You're absolutely right. The light purple area is the area that in our city that has the older structures that have reached an age of their life where it probably makes sense to maybe level them and start from scratch, right? Or they're underdeveloped properties. We have properties on Midway Boulevard, our main commercial corridor, that are little single-family cabins, right? That property is underdeveloped. But if we're looking to, bring in as many housing units or as many affordable housing units as possible, I think we need to consider the area of town where we currently have some of that multifamily, because there would be an incentive for those people to redevelop. There are properties over there that were built to older density codes where there's room for an additional 6, 7, 8 units, right? And that's the section of town, I think, outside of redevelopment, if we're really looking to add housing, I think that's where the potential's at. Now, with that said, the Affordable Housing Task Force met for, 2.5 years? Mayor, you were there, you were involved. I think we had 35 or 40 people, a lot smarter than me, having these discussions. And we discussed this stuff to nauseam over those 2.5 years. Hundreds of hours of discussion about how do we create affordable housing. We must have talked for 20 hours. What does affordable mean, right? Try to define that. So we really dove into this, right? And what we came up with was the city of Oak Harbor is not the city of Seattle. We do not have a giant tax base or a giant fund where we can provide incentives or supplement housing costs or supplement building costs or go out and buy large tracts of land and give it to developers at below cost in order to get housing created for people below median income. Because that's what we decided. That's what affordable is about, right? a husband and wife who both have a job, they're both working full-time, 40 hours a week, they're working a minimum wage job, what can they afford? Because they should be able to afford a place to live. They're working 2 full-time jobs, right? So that's what we centered in on. We didn't get too wrapped up into the subsidized housing side of things, Section 8, those things, because, quite frankly, those are programs in themselves, right? Those are federal programs, a lot of them, and we didn't feel as though any of our recommendations coming forward could really have an impact upon those programs. But how do we affect what we can affect? So we looked at this multifamily tax exemption as a way to get there. I mean, let's face it, taxes are going to have to be generated from somewhere to create housing at below market value. The market's not going to create it. Contractors are not going to come in and create below market housing. That's what the market, that's the way we use the word market, right? So revenue is going to have to be generated from somewhere to offset to those developers a reason why to sell or rent properties at below what the market says they can get. And so we looked at this program and we said, it's a tax shift. And tax shifts are not popular, right? But how do we create a tax shift that guarantees that the tax shift is going towards creating that housing? And quite frankly, this program does that, right? The money does not get spent, it does not even get collected unless there's a project that meets this criteria and creates this below market housing. Again, it's got to pencil out for the developer too, right? I mean, it just does. Otherwise, we're creating a program that doesn't make any sense. Opportunity Zone, great example. Great program for somebody, who wanted to go redevelop an entire city block. I mean, that's really what it was designed for. Boston, Detroit, opportunity zones in Detroit blew up. People were going in, buying entire city blocks, leveling everything and rebuilding, right? Little towns, it didn't take off on. We're not going to have somebody come in here and buy up a city block to redevelop it, right? Just because we're in an opportunity zone and I'm going to get a, tax incentive. I'm not going to have to pay capital gains on, something else. So without the 12-year and 20-year component, which everybody has said, who jumped on bandwagon first? Habitat. Hey, this is interesting to us, right? Because if we can get a 20-year tax exemption, that pencils out. That makes sense. Without those two components, I don't see this going anywhere. And so I'm just going to go back to my earlier statements. I think we need to sit back and look as to how we can make those 12 and 20-year components work, understanding we've got guidelines there, just like any other program. Those are the programs we need if we really want to create below market housing. If we just want to create a bunch more at market rate housing, certainly the 8-year program, there's an incentive there, right? It's on the back of the taxpayers, right? To subsidize developers to come to our community rather than another community to build that market rate housing. And as we build it, the supply and demand thing will level each other out. But if we really want to create housing that is for those people that are below median income, it's going to take taxes to do it. And quite frankly, I think, like I say, this 12 and 20-year program is the fairest way to do it. Taxpayers pay nothing if there's no housing built. They pay nothing. And if housing's built, well, then we're scratching the surface, right? And we get enough momentum, and who knows, someday we may look back at this and say, you know what, we created 100 below market units out of this program. Wouldn't that be a great thing? That's it. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to first touch on Councilor Munz's recent comment about the hearing at the Navy League meeting about the lack of housing for our active duty and contractors. I hope Navy Command is sharing that with the Pentagon, because we have been telling them every year when we go back to the Pentagon, for as long as I've been on council, so 12 years, we've given them the numbers, we've told them they need new housing, we told them a long time ago, they had plenty of time to build it, and every year they look us in the face and shrug and say, well, we understand, but we have no intention of building any more housing. This is your problem to deal with. So just, anybody listen who has some contacts. I'm not sure how many voices it would take to, and at this point it might even be too late because it would take so long to get anything off the ground. But it's I can probably tell by my tone, a source of frustration for sure. Secondly, it sounds like I may have missed the answer to this question when I was in the restroom. I apologize for leaving, but the $20 a month, you gave us a slide that actually tells us what it's going to cost everybody, but it was unclear if that was going to be a month, a year, the life of the program. What, did I miss that bit of information?
That's a year, I think, isn't it? Isn't that $20 a year?
Annual basis.
Annual,
Thank you. Okay, if it was a month, I wouldn't even consider it, but if it's annually, then I think it's worthy of at least a conversation, as Councilor Wiesner said. Something that I would like to see in a future presentation or included in a future conversation, which I'm interested in having, is actual pros and cons. I want a literal pros and cons list for why each scenario may or may not be, and I've assembled one myself, but you guys know a lot more about this than I do, and so I think you'd probably be able to do a better job. And I would also like to see a hypothetical scenario. I want to see the actual numbers of a hypothetical scenario of the kind of development we want. What if there was a building in a particular part of town that we want to have developed, and it has so many, this is how many allowable units, and this is how many of them are affordable, this is about how much it would cost, and what those tax implications are for the life of the program. I'm looking online, and there's lots of other cities that have done that and penciled it out so that we can actually see in front of us how the numbers would work out and whether or not it would be worth it or not, or whether or not a developer would be willing to do it or not. There are a lot of cities that have really benefited from this program, so I'm definitely interested in continuing to have a conversation, but I think that I need a lot more information. I hope my comments were helpful in terms of exactly what kind of information I'm looking for. Blaine's nodding at me. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Well, that was a for information only presentation, right?
Yes.
All right, yes.
For council input, and we appreciate the input here, so.
And I saw you all listen.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. That concludes our agenda, I believe, right? We do have an executive session. I didn't see it on our agenda. Oh, it is? So my agenda says none.
You have the original version then.
Oh, you're right. Mine says none.
Does that mean there's none?
Are you serious? We're going to have a 20-minute executive session now?
Yeah, it's on there.
Well, I'm not staying past 9 o'clock. I just want you all to know that. I'm just not feeling up to going past 9. So it is 8:19. At this time, the council will move into executive session to discuss with legal counsel litigation or potential litigation per RCW 4230-110-1- another I, or whatever that is. Anticipated duration is 20 minutes. Action may or may not be taken upon return to the open session. Executive sessions are not open to the public. If an extension is needed, Julie will announce the additional time. So it is 8:20, and we're going to go 20 more minutes. this time? Yes.
The council has announced that they will continue the executive session for an additional 5 minutes to 8:45.
Okay, welcome back. This is the Oak Harbor City Council meeting, September 5th, 2023. We've been in executive session for 25 minutes, and there were no decisions made during that meeting. It was not an action item, and therefore, we are now back in, I'd like to call the meeting back in order, and look for a motion to adjourn. So moved. I got a second? That's just all we got to do is wave goodbye. Okay, thank you for coming in.